ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
In the US election in just a month's time, only a handful of the 50 states really matter. One is Michigan. Today, Foreign Correspondent reporter Stephanie March on what makes voters there tick and why some are leaning towards Trump, even if they don't like him. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Steph, you've recently travelled to Michigan, which is, of course, a key swing state where it's really, really tight, neck and neck. Just tell me, what's it like there? Because most of us would never have stepped foot inside Michigan.
Yeah, of course. Well, Michigan is in America's upper Midwest. It's right at the top of the map, shares a border with Canada. So it's most famous for its manufacturing and auto sector. It also has deep musical roots. It's the birthplace of the Motown sound. It is part of the Blue Wall, that industrial working class states that traditionally had voted for Democrat presidents. But in 2016, Donald Trump took a sledgehammer to that wall and won 3 of those key states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin and Michigan. Joe Biden won them back in 2020. But that's really where this current election campaign is being fought.
Okay, so while you were on the ground, you spent some time with Republicans and Democrat campaigners who are, quite frankly, desperately trying to sway voters in these final weeks of campaigning.
The hardest thing is to get them to come to the door.
And I hate Trump, to be honest with you. I really do. He's a pig to me.
Do you have any idea who you're going to be voting for?
So the upcoming ballot, I'm going to be voting Democrat. So like Kamala Harris and Waltz.
Great.
Could I ask you, what do you think of the presidential race?
I'd rather not speak on it.
Okay, well, then your mind is open. At least you're thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
We visited 4 crucial counties just to see how the grassroots Democrats and Republicans are chasing those votes. We followed them as they went door knocking, meeting with undecided and independent voters. We saw them run fundraising events and volunteer drives, and there is so much happening in these swing states right now. The money that's being thrown at it is just extraordinary on both sides.
Okay, so tell me about the Republicans' push first. They're working really hard to win over parts of the African American community, aren't they?
Yeah. Democrats traditionally do really well with African American voters. Exit polls from 2020 show that I think Joe Biden won the high 80s, nearly 90% of the black vote nationally. Detroit is one of the largest black majority cities in America. And this year, Donald Trump told Republican leaders in Michigan to go after black voters who would usually vote Democrat. And we saw that at play at a Republican fundraising dinner in the Detroit suburbs.
I want Trump in the room when Vladimir Putin shows up.
The Republicans invited a speaker, a guy called Kwame Kilpatrick. Now, he is a former mayor of Detroit and a Democrat who's now supporting Donald Trump.
It's not about warm and touchy feelings. It's about how we come together as a nation. We can fight about our differences later, but at some point, we got to act like the United States of America. Sound the alarm.
But there's more to Kilpatrick's story than just being a former Democrat turned Trump backer that the Republicans are leveraging off. In 2021, he was 7 years into a 28-year sentence for corruption crimes committed while he was mayor, when then President Donald Trump commuted his sentence and made him a free man. Now, both Kilpatrick and Trump are now convicted criminals, and they believe that they are victims of an unfair justice system that often unfairly targets particularly the African American community. And both Donald Trump and Kilpatrick say that they think that is a leverage point that Donald Trump can use to try and win over more black voters.
The inequity in prosecution and sentencing is something that's been going on in America for a long time. But Donald Trump, now people in the community feel that somebody who's experienced would be better prepared to meet it and try to change it.
Yeah, so justice and justice for black Americans is a key way the Republicans are trying to win over that community in Michigan.
Yeah, and Donald Trump has said previously that he thinks his criminal indictments and that his mugshot will appeal to black voters because, quote, what's happening to me happens to them.
You know who embraced it more than anybody else? The black population. It's incredible. You see black people walking around with my mugshot. You know, they do shirts and they sell them for
Steph, you also spent a lot of time with a Republican called Mark Fortin. So tell me about him.
Mark Fortin is a 77-year-old retired auto worker who's also the chairman of the Macomb County Republican Party. So Macomb County is the third largest county in Michigan. It's the backbone of Michigan's car manufacturing industry, what's left of it.
Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Stephanie from Australian TV.
Stephanie, nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too.
And the groundswell of support in Macomb is often credited as the reason Donald Trump won Michigan in 2016 by just 10,000 votes. And Mark and his team have a really interesting approach to voter outreach. Most campaigns will use data to find infrequent, undecided and unreliable voters from their own party. They concentrate their efforts there for maximum benefit. There's not much point usually going after, someone who's voted Republican their whole life. But what Mark's doing is they're knocking on every single door, regardless of political persuasion.
We went to every door because, again, you don't know who's on the other side of the door. And you don't know how they're suffering. Maybe they just lost jobs because factories moved. Maybe God knows what, right? And the inflation is terrible. So we're going to everybody. We're going to go to everybody again.
So the prospect for there being more Democrat votes in this heavily, heavily Republican Trump county is something that they're going after. We followed Mark as he went door knocking with Terence McCoskey, who's the Republican candidate running for sheriff, and their conversations that they had with voters were really interesting. They met one independent voter in particular who had a big problem with Donald Trump's character, and they tried to persuade him.
Let me ask you a question. As an independent, what turns you off about Donald Trump? Is it the way he talks or what he's done?
His character.
His character, okay.
His character.
Oh, I got you.
Put it this way. I don't know if you guys have daughters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Would you want a young man with his exact moral fiber step into your house and taking your daughter out tonight? You'd be like, I don't think so.
And a big part of their tactic is that they believe that the media is really unfair to Donald Trump, and if they can just reach voters and tell them a different story, then they'll start to come around to the Republican cause.
I did security for his family and for his children, and I've had President Bush, President Obama, President Clinton. And out of all those presidents, President Trump was by far the most respectful, the nicest to be around, and the most pleasant to everybody in law enforcement. And his children were second to none.
All right, so Steph, now let's look at the Democrats. You went along with Marcy door knocking. What did you take away from that? That would have been fascinating.
Yeah, so Marcy Paul, she's a Democrat volunteer in Oakland County, which is the second biggest county. It's a affluent, mostly white, reasonably educated part of the state. Voters there have been drifting towards the Democrats in recent elections. And she was going after undecided and infrequent voters. And it was really interesting to hear what people had to say.
Mr. Mallory?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Marcy, and I was wondering if you would talk to me a little bit about the upcoming election.
She talked to one couple who said that they really didn't like Trump, but they were conservatives and would vote for him anyway.
I see our civilization falling apart, so I want to conserve as much as I can. So, yes, I am voting conservative.
Yeah.
The woman at the door actually pinched her nose and said, I'll do this and vote for him.
Not happy with any of the candidates.
And Marcy met another guy at one of the doors who also said he hates Trump, but he voted for him in the primary because of his plan to push for term limits for members of Congress, which to me was just another reminder of how some really niche things can be what ultimately voters make their decisions on. That's why this election is really, really, really hard fought from both sides.
Yeah, and you have to tell me about Tom Moore because he's a really interesting guy.
Yes, Tom Moore is a very interesting guy. He's from Michigan's traditionally conservative west side. He's a lifelong Republican. He voted for Trump in 2016, but this year he's voting for Kamala Harris. And we talked to him because he's lent his face and his name and his quotes to a huge billboard campaign, a $50 million nationwide billboard campaign that's showcasing addressing former Trump voters who are now voting against him.
I'm a veteran, a U.S. Army veteran. I'm a conservative. I'm a gun owner. And I'm not voting for Trump. It makes it more real. There must be a good reason why I'm not voting for him. And maybe it will make someone think a little bit.
But essentially, he's worried about the Trump-Vance ticket, should they win, turning America into an isolationist nation. And he put his face on this billboard, which is a big thing to do in a really conservative part of the state, because he just wants those undecided voters to maybe think twice and realise that even if they are conservative, they do have a choice in this election.
So, Steph, you also found, which is really interesting, that the Democrats can't necessarily count on the supporters they have had in the past. You were interested in the large Arab population in Dearborn, which is in Michigan, of course. They have a big problem with the Democrats' support for Israel.
That's right. So Dearborn is the first American city where the majority of residents are Arab American. 60% of Arab Americans voted for Joe Biden in 2020, according to exit polls. But it's his and Kamala Harris's position on the war in Gaza that has support for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz put it really in jeopardy.
Palestine will be free!
And this is a group that are now refusing to endorse Kamala Harris. And so while Kamala Harris repeatedly has called for a ceasefire in Gaza, her team has said that she does not support an arms embargo on Israel, which really is the red line for a lot of these protesters. In the last election, Joe Biden won Michigan by 154,000 votes. There's an estimated 270,000 Arab Americans of voting age in the state. So their votes could potentially really be the difference between Kamala Harris winning or losing the state.
Wow. Okay, Steph, let's then have a look at what you took away from all the time that you spent in Michigan. You were actually in the US for the ABC when Trump won back in 2016, which was, as we all remember, somewhat of a shock. How do you think America's changed since then? I think it's undeniable that it's a different place.
The obvious thing is to say that the US is very divided now, and I feel like a lot of Americans today really do not understand people with different political views, nor do they try to, because they just see the candidates on the opposite side as so extreme and the people who support them being so lost. The other thing that I think has shifted is the mood. I feel like in 2016 when I was there, many Americans still had this relentless positivity and optimism that comes with American exceptionalism, which can be quite infectious. But I think Donald Trump has really smashed that to pieces for a lot of people. I think America's a very different place than it was in 2016, and so is the world. And each side feels like the stakes have never been higher. The Democrat Marcy Paul, who we went door knocking with, said the idea of going back to Trump, particularly on the issue of women's reproductive rights, is horrible, unthinkable to her. But for someone like Republican Mark Fortin, it's the absolute opposite. He said that Trump has to win because the road to freedom doesn't go in any other direction.
So what's your feeling then in Michigan? Did you get a sense at all which way it might go, or is it just, as the polls show, way too close to tell?
Yeah, I mean, look, I wish if I knew, because then I'd probably be in a different job getting paid a lot more money. No,
exactly.
Look, I think a lot could and probably will happen between now and Election Day, particularly with what we're seeing in the Middle East. I think for voters on all sides, you know, Democrat, Republican and independent voters, the polls show that the economy is repeatedly the number one issue. And if on Election Day you rock up at the polling booth and you think about what your life's like now compared to the 4 years when Trump was in office, I think for some people, you know, with inflation the way it is and the housing crisis and all the other issues, it might just be what tips them to vote for Donald Trump. But on the other hand, Kamala Harris's favourability is higher than his. So if you go to the polls as an undecided voter knowing nothing and you're going on the vibe of who you like more, maybe she gets more of those votes. So I think at this point it's impossible to know.
Stephanie March is a reporter with Foreign Correspondent, which goes to air on ABC TV on Thursday nights. You can catch her report on iView. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Cara Jensen-McKinnon. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again on Monday. Thanks for listening.